to introduce you to the audience. So my guest today is Mindy Stern. She's a member of Schwartz Sladkus Reich Greenberg Atlas LLP, a New York-based law firm where she focuses on real estate, estate planning, and estate administration. All of those things are items you're going to have to deal with when you're going through a divorce. And she has extensive experience with this. And so having her on today is really kind of a bonus for anybody who's joining us who might have a question about your estate plan when you go through a divorce, if you've got real estate holdings, what you should be doing with them, or maybe you have to redo all of your trust. So Mindy is our go-to. I'm going to dive in. Thank you again for joining us today, Mindy. I'm thrilled to have this conversation. And I'm just going to jump into the first question. If you're going to go through a divorce, how does that affect a will or a trust? Like, what do you need to be mindful of before you even start the process?
Thank you again for your patience, not only to you, Alex, but to everyone who is listening. So I'm going to speculate that everyone who is listening, the last thing that they ever want to be thinking about is talking about death and disability. And that's true whether you are going through a divorce or you are happily married.
Yeah.
It gets more complicated and more fraught when you are going through a divorce. And let's face it, in some ways, divorce it's like a death.
Yeah.
And it requires you to rethink your entire universe of, if I got hit by the proverbial bus tomorrow, who gets my stuff? Who takes care of my kids if I have kids? And who am I putting in charge? It was easy when you were married. In some ways, you would just kind of assume. A lot of people don't even have planning documents. 50% of the people who died in the World Trade Center disaster did not have any wills. They had no trust. They had nothing. And that created all sorts of issues. When you're going through a divorce, that doesn't get any better. So if you don't have planning documents in place, now is the time to start. And if you do have planning documents in place, now is the time to rethink them, because all of your decisions about, I'll just have my spouse. If something happens to me, my spouse will just get what I have. And if something happens to the spouse too, the kids will. All of that is now upended. And if your kids are minors, who's taking care of them if something happens to them? Mm-hmm. And if you have beneficiary designations set up, that all has to, it's like you're starting over and you have to rethink all of those decisions. And that's true whether you have a lot of money or very little money, because even if you don't have a lot of money, you still have the same issues of who gets my stuff and who's taking care of my kids and what happens if, we're all going in the same bus accident. All of those things have to be thought through.
Yeah, I think that the fact that you're saying up to 50% of people in the United States who, are married don't have this kind of plan laid out is shocking. And I'm not surprised. I think there is this idea that it's a much more complicated process, or it's reserved for the 1%. And I love the fact that you touched on the fact that it doesn't matter what your income bracket is. All of this information is important. If you have something, a trust, a will, whatever it might be, an estate plan in place during marriage, you are going to have to, change it completely after a divorce. And as you brought up so rightly, if you have kids, that's doubly true. And if they're young, these are considerations that you're going to have to revisit time and time again after a divorce as things change. If somebody, let's say they have a will or an estate, a trust, and they're about to go through a divorce, when should they reach out to their, attorney who specializes in that to start thinking about what's going to need to change and when to start those changes?
Yeah, they should be reaching out to the estate attorney at the same time that they are reaching out to the matrimonial attorney, because the way I think of these things, you need a team.
Yeah.
You need a whole bunch of different people to help you navigate through, starting with yourself in terms of kind of quarterbacking, explaining to people what they need and the best resources to find that. If they don't already have a financial advisor, they should be talking to one. If they don't already have a matrimonial attorney, obviously they need to talk to someone. Then they need to talk to the estate attorney and perhaps an insurance professional. If, even if they didn't have insurance before, they may need it now, either in connection with their settlement, their matrimonial settlement, because one spouse typically agrees to do certain things to provide certain financial security to the other. Well, what happens if that person gets hit by the proverbial bus?
Yeah.
What's, where's the money coming from that was otherwise going to be uh, given to the less moneyed spouse through, annual distributions or payment of income? All of that needs to be replaced if the spouse who is going to provide all that gets hit by the
Yeah.
bus. And so there's a lot to sort through, and this is what the group of, professionals, some are attorneys and some are not, but the group of professionals, your accountant, to evaluate all sorts of other things relative to taxes. There's a whole group of people that need to be involved in this to make it work for you, to figure out, okay, now that this big pot is getting split in some fashion, how is all of this going to get resolved in a way that people can move on?
So true. I really like that you pointed out that, the person going through the process, does need to be activated. That's, part of my whole philosophy as a divorce prep coach, as the divorce planner, is you are always going to be your best advocate, and nobody's going to care about the details of your life the way you do. So kind of getting on top. And I think a lot of people getting on top of all those details early and circling your wagons and meeting with the right professionals as soon as possible to assemble your team is always going to empower you, and it's going to put you in the best position to make smart choices during your divorce negotiations, but also then to prepare for the changes, the financial changes that are going to come after divorce, in a way that they're temporary, and being able to again, activate, a family law attorney or a mediator, your financial planner. Absolutely. Especially when it comes to retirement. I love putting a focus on that as well. It's so important because you have to rethink all of your future plans in addition to your will, your trust, your real estate holdings, all of that. It's starting from fresh again. And I think
Absolutely.
a lot of people get intimidated by that idea. It's, oh my gosh, it's so much work. I'm just going to bury my head in the sand. Please don't do that. It's a huge mistake. And that's what these professionals are here for. They're here to make it easier for you, but you want to go to them educated about all the important documents and statements that are a part of your life, and have financial clarity about how much you have coming in, how much you have going out, what your debts are, and kind of that's, if you don't know where to start, please check my page on my website. It's exactly what I do. So you go in with everything necessary so that, Mindy can get to work. And if you're looking for a divorce attorney or a mediator, I do have a freebie, 24 questions to ask a divorce attorney or mediator, that's available through the link in my site. It's a good jumping off point just to make it a little bit easier. So obviously, Mindy, you've worked with clients, right, who've gone through a divorce and had to unravel a lot of these things and then rethink all of their plans. What are some common mistakes around your area of specialty that you see people making, that perhaps if we talk about them today, somebody will avoid making them?
Well, the biggest mistake is not dealing with it. So, that goes without saying. But I'm saying it anyway, that just ignoring it. When people ignore their planning, what I tell them is, you can pretend that you're not making any decisions, but in fact you are. The decision that you're making is that you're going to let the law of the state
Yeah.
where you live dictate who gets your stuff, who takes your kids, and who is in charge of all that. Those are the decisions you've made. Every state has a law that says, if you die with a spouse and no kids, your spouse gets everything. If you die with a spouse and kids, it gets divided in certain ways. If don't have a spouse and you don't have kids, it goes up to your parents in many states. And then if you don't have any parents living, then it goes sideways to your siblings or to their kids.
Mhm.
And the point of saying all this to everyone is, in some respects, that may be exactly what you don't want.
Yeah.
There may be people in your universe who you don't want to have any money, sometimes because there are dysfunctional, relationships, but sometimes it's because they can't handle the money, or are they have special needs, or they have a gambling issue, or whatever the case may be, or you don't talk to them, or they live in Timbuktu, or they don't need it. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a million reasons why if you say, oh, I'm not making a decision, you actually
Mhm.
have. And that's why it's so important for you to decide who you want to
Mhm.
get your assets, who you want to put in charge. And this is not just true if you pass away, but if you become incapacitated.
Mhm.
Somebody has to help you with your financial affairs. Somebody has to make healthcare decisions for you. Somebody has to control, all of those things. And it's just as important, in my opinion, to have in place people you want in charge of dealing with incapacity issues as it is the death scenario. So
Mhm.
it's all about you making the decisions, you being in charge, and making your wishes known.
I love that. And the fact that you brought up that if you don't have a directive, if you don't have an estate plan, if you don't have a will, if you don't have a trust, then it's up to the state to decide, right? It's the same as, if you enter into a marriage and, people are like, oh, always get a prenup or get a postnup. Well, if you don't have one, the laws of your state are your prenup, you know? And so
Exactly.
it's exactly the same when it comes to this subject and this area of life as well. And you touched on something that is so important. It might feel like, oh, well, it's from one big idea to another big idea. Oh my gosh, I'm dealing with a divorce and my life is in upheaval and it's already making me feel overwhelmed. I don't know where to start. And then adding into that, well, I have to rethink who is going to be the person who's going to make the legal decisions. God forbid something happens to me. Who's going to be the executor of my estate? Who's going to take care of my children? All of those things you need to be on top of early in the process, because they're going to come into play during negotiations. Like when you are at this point, the early point where perhaps you're just starting to educate yourself about the process, maybe you and your spouse have just said to each other, I think maybe divorce is the right next step. Meeting with Mindy Stern, going out and consulting with different divorce attorneys or mediators now is going to put you in the best position as you're negotiating, because you're going to have a bigger plan. You're going to understand what needs to get done and take that into consideration during the negotiation period, especially if you have kids. Um,
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
you
And the
mentioned,
other thing,
yes,
if
go
I
ahead.
may add, Alex, is another common mistake people make is they don't look at their beneficiary designations. It's very common for people to have life insurance or retirement accounts. And again, if you're married, typical arrangement is the spouse gets it all. And if the spouse doesn't survive, the kids do. Well, now that the kids are going to be the primary, first of all, you have to remember that you set all these things
Yeah.
up. People are often horrified to, realize that they didn't change their beneficiary designations, and that's a problem. So you want to make sure that if you're going to have your kids as your primary, well, if your kids are minors, that isn't great either, because many states say, well, if the kids are minors, they don't have the legal capacity to own the property. So some guardian that's court appointed is going to take charge of that money and give it to them all when they're 18. That's not a great scenario.
No.
So you want to set things up properly so that that doesn't happen.
Completely agree. The last thing I'm always advocating for my clients and for my followers is that you want to have as much ownership over the outcome of this divorce as opposed to a third party, a judge, right? It's like so now's the time, even though it feels like a lot. And our lives don't stop when we're thrown a huge hurdle like a divorce. But you have to just break things up, little tasks into manageable to-dos and get through it. And I would say, even for people who are feeling this is a little daunting to do that much, think of it as you're laying the groundwork for your new life, right? And it's like the sooner you have all these details taken care of, the better off you're going to be. And you can enter into this next chapter secure, knowing that all the T's have been crossed and all the I's have been dotted, and you can go on your merry way. It's the ultimate insurance plan, in addition to
Yes.
changing your insurance plan.
It is, and I've had so many clients tell me after they've gone through the process, which I kind of I lay out, I refer to it as the decision tree.
Mhm.
Here are
Oh,
all
yeah.
the key decisions you have to
Mhm.
make. In some cases, people are lucky enough to have obvious choices
Yeah.
that they don't need to agonize over. In other cases, we really have to have very, intimate conversations about the different options that they have and what, work our way to what feels right for them.
Mhm.
The other thing that's really, really important that I tell people is sometimes people get stuck
Mhm.
because they think that whatever decision they make today,
Mhm.
that's it, they're
Yeah.
done. And I say, and that stops them. They get frozen. And I say, no, you only need to think of this as a decision that's good for the next 5 years.
Yes.
Just make the best decision you can for what makes sense if you got hit by the bus today.
Mhm.
5 years from now, chances are things will have
Yeah.
changed and you'll need to rethink, people that you had close relationships with, maybe that's changed.
Yeah.
Other people in your universe who you made the choice to have them be in charge, they've passed away, they got hit by the bus.
Yeah.
And you're rethinking all the decisions. And that's
Yeah.
fine. You don't need to make the perfect decision that lasts the rest of your life. Don't let that stop you from making decisions now. Make the best decision for now. And in 5 years, unless something significant has changed since before then, fine, you'll just look at it again in 5 years. Maybe it'll be perfect in 5 years and maybe you'll
Yeah.
tweak it, whatever. But don't let that concept that it's got to last forever stop you from doing what makes sense now.
Mindy, that is the best way to wrap this conversation up. I think that is the most valuable piece of advice that everybody needs to hear, which is just think short term. I have on my blog, I wrote a whole post about the 555 rule. And as you're going through a divorce, put everything through that. How's this going to affect me in 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years? And I love that that's the perspective that you brought into this. And I'm so grateful that you joined us today. Thank you, Mindy. And
Oh,
I'm so glad to be your first IG Live.
thank you so much for indulging me and being patient. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And if people want to connect with you, how's the best way for them to reach out?
Obviously not Instagram. The best way is go to our firm, which is SSRGA, has a website. I can be found there, or they can just contact me directly by email, mstern, STERN, at ssrga.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mindy. Again, thank you to everybody who's joined us. This conversation is going to live on immediately after on Instagram and my blog. And Mindy, I hope this is the first of many conversations I get to have with you.
Same here. Great
Thank
fun.
you.
Have a good
Thank you, everybody.
weekend.
Bye.